I never imagined that my world could fall apart so quickly. My name is Claire, and at 41, I considered myself a devoted wife and mother of two amazing kids: our son, Eric, who just turned 18, and our daughter, Mary, now 15. For the better part of 2 decades, my husband, Paul, and I built a life together, steady and dependable, or so I thought. But the events that unfolded revealed a darker, more sinister side to my marriage, one that shattered the very foundation of our family. Paul and I met when I was in my early 20s. Back then, he was charming, with an undeniable magnetism. He was 10 years my senior, confident, and worldly in a way that fascinated me. Our relationship felt like a whirlwind. He made me feel beautiful, valued, and loved. Over the years, I transitioned from being a working professional to a stay-at-home mom, devoted to my family and children. But as time passed, the life we'd built felt more routine, a bit colorless, and I chalked it up to the natural evolution of any marriage. What I didn't know was that beneath the surface, Paul had drifted into a life filled with secrets. Our son, Eric, started dating a wonderful young woman, Amy, when they were freshmen in high school. She quickly became part of our lives, spending family dinners and holidays with us, and her warm, caring nature only deepened the bond we shared. I thought of her as a daughter, and seeing how she and Eric adored each other filled me with pride. I had no idea how tragically misplaced my trust was. The discovery happened by accident. One evening, Paul had his phone open, scrolling through various applications as he tended to do, but something caught my eye. He swiped up, and in a split second, I glimpsed a message thread with Amy, one that set my heart racing. I convinced myself I must have misread it. After all, why would my husband be messaging our son's girlfriend? But the gnawing sensation wouldn't go away. When Paul wasn't around, I dared to check his phone, and my worst fears were confirmed. I read a line that turned my blood cold. Amy had messaged him about missing his touch. I felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. In those next few moments, I discovered not only the truth about their interactions, but a part of my husband that I had never known. It wasn't just Amy. I found saved photos of her and flirtatious messages that made my stomach turn. And it didn't stop there. Paul had an extensive file on his computer filled with BDSM content, dating profiles, and chats with multiple other women. The man I'd loved and trusted had led a double life. When I confronted Paul about this, hoping to understand how we'd arrived at such a terrible place, I was met with defensiveness and anger. He accused me of intruding on his privacy, turning every suspicion around on me. His reaction frightened me. I began to question my safety and the safety of our children. How was I supposed to reveal this dark secret to Eric, to tell him that his father and the girl he loved had betrayed him? The burden of the truth weighed heavily on me. I felt isolated and lost, overwhelmed by the sheer depth of Paul's deception. But as shocking as the betrayal was, it was the extent of Paul's manipulation and cruelty that haunted me the most. He had turned my insecurities, my aging body, my status as a stay-at-home mom, into the butt of his private jokes with Amy. They exchanged cruel remarks, laughing about me as though I were nothing but an obstacle in their affair. My self-worth, already fragile from years of subtle put-downs, was shattered. Determined not to act impulsively, I sought legal advice from my brother, who connected me with a tough, no-nonsense attorney. I gathered all the evidence I could, taking screenshots, saving files, and creating a record that I could use to protect myself and my children if necessary. I was preparing for a future where I'd no longer have Paul by my side. When I finally mustered the courage to tell Eric and Mary, it was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had. We drove to my brother's house, a place I hoped would feel safe and supportive. I carefully explained the situation, choosing my words with as much sensitivity as I could muster. Mary, my sweet, intelligent daughter, reacted with anger. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, unable to understand how her father could betray us so deeply. Eric, my compassionate and strong son, sat in stunned silence, grappling with the weight of the truth. In the days that followed, I reached out to Amy's mother, hoping to shed light on the relationship between Amy and Paul. She was horrified, furious, and devastated, just as I was. She told me that Amy was adamant about her love for Paul, believing in his lies and empty promises. It was painfully clear that he had manipulated her, taken advantage of her youth and vulnerability. But Amy, blinded by her feelings, refused to see the reality of her situation. Paul and I had one final confrontation over a video call, during which he seemed more desperate than ever. His face was flushed, his voice filled with anger as he repeated, "Context. You don't understand the context." Over and over. But I had seen all I needed to see. There was no context that could justify his actions, no explanation that could erase the damage he had done. His defensiveness only underscored the depth of his deceit. The confrontation escalated, with Paul becoming increasingly agitated and accusatory. He claimed I was trying to ruin his life, threatening to fight for custody of the kids, despite his clear disregard for their well-being. I ended the call abruptly, shaken by the venom in his voice and the volatility in his eyes. I felt as though I had glimpsed a stranger, not the man I had married. In the aftermath, my family became my refuge. My brother and his wife opened their home to us, surrounding Eric, Mary, and me with love and support. The kids were deeply affected. Eric's pain was particularly evident. He was grappling not only with the betrayal by his father, but also with the loss of his first love. Mary, too, struggled, questioning everything she thought she knew about her father. I arranged for both kids to see a therapist, hoping they could process the trauma with someone who could help them make sense of the chaos. Meanwhile, the legal battle had begun. With my lawyer's guidance, I filed for divorce, seeking full custody of Mary, while Eric, now 18, would have the autonomy to decide his own future. I obtained a restraining order against Paul, fearing the intensity of his anger and the unpredictability of his behavior. Paul's reaction was as expected, filled with accusations, denials, and attempts to gaslight me into believing I was in the wrong. The days that followed felt like an endless blur of emotional highs and lows. My mind raced with memories, trying to piece together all the moments that should have hinted at Paul's betrayal. How had I not seen this coming? The realization that he had not only betrayed me but also tainted the sanctity of our home, our safe haven, was unbearable. Each time I thought about Paul's twisted relationship with Amy, my stomach churned. It wasn't just the infidelity that hurt, it was the blatant disregard for our family, the manipulation of someone Eric loved, and the callous way he and Amy ridiculed me. Mary was a storm of emotions. She oscillated between fury and sorrow, slamming doors one minute and curling up on the couch in silence the next. Her friends rallied around her, sharing stories that made my heart ache. They told Mary how they'd always felt uncomfortable around Paul, recalling moments when his glances lingered a bit too long or his questions became oddly personal. One friend even confided that Paul had complimented her clothing in a way that felt invasive. The revelation made me feel physically sick. How long had this gone on without me knowing? Eric, on the other hand, was a different kind of broken. His hurt was quieter, more internal. While he maintained a strong facade, his eyes were shadowed with pain. He avoided speaking about Amy and Paul, retreating to his room to play guitar or go for long drives, sometimes not returning until late at night. I knew he was processing everything in his own way, but it worried me that he kept so much bottled up. Despite this, He tried to be there for me, asking if I was okay or if I needed anything. His concern was touching, but I wished he didn't feel the need to carry my burden as well as his own. Amy's situation was complicated and tragic. I felt an odd mix of anger and sympathy toward her. She was, without a doubt, a victim of Paul's manipulation, but her denial made it difficult to fully extend compassion. Her mother, exhausted from trying to break through to her daughter, would call me late at night, her voice shaking with frustration and worry. "I've tried everything, Claire. She just won't listen. She thinks she's in love. How do I make her see this for what it is?" I didn't have an answer. It was painfully clear that Amy was still in the grips of Paul's influence, believing in a fantasy he had crafted. The news that Amy had been sneaking out at night to see Paul brought a fresh wave of panic. The idea of her slipping out, vulnerable and convinced she was in love with a man who had groomed her, was terrifying. I could only hope that, at some point, reality would break through the illusion Paul had built around her. Her mother, worn down by Amy's defiance, worried that if she pushed too hard, Amy might run straight into Paul's arms for good. It was a precarious balance. Throughout all of this, my brother and his wife were pillars of strength. They provided a safe space where my kids and I could heal, at least partially. My brother sat with Eric late into the night, talking when Eric was willing or simply sitting in silence when he wasn't. His wife, an empathetic and nurturing soul, took Mary under her wing, offering her comfort and understanding without judgment. Their support was a lifeline. Meanwhile, I worked closely with my lawyer to navigate the legal maze of divorce and custody. Paul's actions had given me solid ground to stand on, and my lawyer reassured me that the evidence I had gathered would work in my favor. "Justice takes time," he reminded me during one of our meetings. "But with what we have, there's no question that will secure your safety and that of your kids." Hearing this brought a small measure of relief, a glimmer of hope that there was a way out of the nightmare. Paul's behavior became increasingly erratic. He called incessantly, leaving messages filled with anger and pleading in equal measure. "You're tearing this family apart, Claire. You're the one who's making this worse," one voicemail seethed. But beneath the anger, I could hear a tremor of fear. He knew that his carefully constructed world was unraveling, and he was powerless to stop it. Amy's mother informed me that, despite her efforts, Amy continued to sneak out. The police were notified, but because Amy was 18, there was little they could do. My heart sank with the realization that, as much as I wanted to protect her, there were limits to what I could do without her cooperation. The burden of seeing her caught in Paul's web was immense, and I hoped that time, or an unexpected turn of events, might eventually wake her up to the reality of her situation. One afternoon, I sat down with Eric and Mary to discuss the next steps. It was time to confront what our future would look like. Eric listened, his face unreadable, while Mary's eyes welled with tears. "Are we ever going to be normal again, Mom?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. The question pierced my heart. Normal felt like a distant memory, something that belonged to a different lifetime. But I leaned forward and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll find a new normal, sweetheart. It won't be easy, but we'll do it together." The day of the temporary custody hearing came and went in a flurry of nerves and tense silence. Paul didn't appear in person, which both relieved and frustrated me. My lawyer made our case, presenting the evidence of Paul's infidelity and predatory behavior. The judge granted me temporary custody of Mary and a protective order, ensuring that Paul couldn't come near us. It was a step forward, but the victory felt hollow, overshadowed by the emotional wreckage we were all still trying to navigate. Mary's anger turned inward as the days stretched into weeks. She shut herself in her room, emerging only when necessary, and speaking in clipped, guarded sentences. I watched her closely, noting the moments when she seemed to spiral into her thoughts, and gently encouraged her to see a therapist. It took time, but eventually, she agreed, understanding that she needed help to process her father's betrayal and the shattered trust it left in its wake. Eric continued to surprise me with his resilience, even though I knew he was hurting deeply. He threw himself into his music, finding solace in the strings of his guitar. I caught snippets of songs he played, raw and aching, filled with unspoken words. Music became his outlet, a way for him to express the pain he wouldn't share with words. The turning point came a month after the confrontation. One evening, I received a call from Amy's mother. Her voice was tense but hopeful. "Claire, I think Amy's starting to see the truth. She's been quieter, asking questions about how relationships should be. I don't want to get my hopes up, but it feels different this time." It was the first spark of light I had heard in a long time, and I clung to it, praying that Amy's awakening would be the key to unraveling Paul's hold over her. The legal process was grueling and slow, each step a reminder of the betrayal I was fighting to overcome. But with each passing day, I felt a small piece of myself returning. The woman who had once felt like a shell was starting to rebuild, stronger than before. I knew that the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but I also knew that I wasn't alone. My children, my family, and the supportive voices of those who stood by me were proof that healing was possible, even after the deepest wounds.